Alexis,
Yes.
have you driven through Gangjeong Village recently?
No, I have not at all. And based on what we're about to talk to, it occurred to me just how long it's been. I used to go down there kind of regularly. They used to have these hippie markets down at the river. You would walk the path into the forest, and then all the jewelry makers and the food makers, they would just be spread out under the trees and swimming and selling. And oh gosh, it was so beautiful down there and so fun.
Oh, so when was the last time you think you were there?
I
Years,
honestly don't know. That's how long it's been. I mean, for sure the base was there for sure, because one of the last times I was there, we were swimming, but there's a I don't want to like the location. I don't want to give it away, but it's a swimming. The river runs into the ocean. You know, the river runs into the ocean, and it's a really cool place to swim. But the military guard tower is now there. And if you're that, you get a lot of looks, a lot of attention. More people come into the guard tower and make sure nothing nefarious is going on. So, I mean, but it's been a long time.
Yeah.
So why are you asking? Is it because of the recent news?
Yeah. Well, for people who don't know, Gangjeong Village is like 15 minutes away from me to the west.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's,
I was like, okay.
And it's a town that now hosts a multi-purpose tourism port / naval military base, and it got a lot of attention, international attention. Like Noam Chomsky and Oliver Stone came down here back in 2010 when they were trying to build it, as like huge protests had kind of like subsumed the entire village.
Right.
And, yeah. Did you ever see any of that?
Oh yes. Absolutely. It was such a big thing. Yeah.
And I was covering it then. And so I was there all the time. Like I was going down there pretty much daily. That's actually how Hyunjung and I, those were our first dates. Hyunjung would come with me and be my translator while we were going into Gangjeong. I met her like a week before that. And she's like,
no way.
Yeah.
How did I not know that?
Yeah. I met her through friends, and she's like, oh yeah, if you're ever in in Jungwoo, give me a call. And I'm like, I was going there the next day. She was just being cordial. So, and I'm like, so that's what, a lot of our dates were there. But, and anyway, so that was years ago. The base has now been open for at least 5 years now. And, protests are still occurring. Protests still have their, flags all over the bridges. There is a Catholic shanty where they perform mass. There's a lot of
shanty. Yeah.
I don't know what to call it. That's what it looks like to me.
Yeah.
And a local politician recently, Kang Min-suk, she got into hot water when she said that to attract tourists, for Gangjeong to attract tourists, which is one of the purposes of the base, or at least that's a justification for it from the government.
Right.
They need to erase, quote, the traces of history. And what she means by that is the protests. Because there are a lot of protest paraphernalia all over the town. And
there is a lot of the yellow. Yeah.
And she got into so much hot water that she had to apologize for it.
Right.
Because protesters, and those protesters in particular, possibly, I don't know, are quite loud, which is their right to be as protesters. Right. Now, I was curious about what your thoughts on this are. Should, like, with that.
This is what, before we even get into this too much, it's very important to state that I'm very aware that this is not my country, that it is not, Jeju is not my land, that sort of thing. So I want to say that with caution, that I get that. I think you and I had a conversation, and I think I have two opinions. I think you said it best. I do think a lot of people come specifically to that area as tourists to see these things. I do think it was never a tourist destination before the military base. Like I said, we used to have these little hidden markets and these little secret swimming holes. No one used to go down there. Now there's nothing on Jeju that's secret and private anymore, but that was certainly never a spot that was drawing in any tourists. The way Jeju is sort of laid out, you could just kind of bypass that whole area and you wouldn't even know it existed, honestly. So the fact is, I do think more people come there specifically for that sort of, for the, gosh, help me out here,
protest
for the protest stuff. I do
see that. Right.
Yeah. And then I will say, my second thought is, again, this is where I need to say it's not my country. I do think that it has, some of the banners and stuff, it just looks like trash now. Yeah. They're ripped, you know what I mean? Like, and you need to know that I haven't been down there in a long time, but when I was last down there, and it was still, there were still active things going on. Even those banners were ripped and torn and shredded. And, Jeju's wind is vicious. So it's, I don't know.
I love talking about this. I love talking. It's interesting to talk about this.
Yes, because it is very interesting.
Such a complex situation because yes, it is. And I always said there's different frameworks you can look at it, right? You can look at it as a Jeju issue, but it's also a South Korean issue. So when I tell people that the majority of protesters are not from Jeju, they're from the mainland. Yeah. That sounds like a criticism. And it kind of is, but also it's not because it's also a South Korean naval base. They have just as much right to protest as other people.
Right. But
it depends on so I've been there lots and I've interviewed
outsiders
and I know family and stuff. The people who are natives to Ganjgeong, like natives, they go back generations.
Yep.
Naval base and the protests severed relationships. Like generational friendships.
Absolutely. It was a big thing.
And when Moon Jae-in came and talked to them, the people told them, but what we want you to do is to help sever our relationships. And to help, that's what we want to do. And those I've spoken to have said that they want the protesters to leave and they want to do their best that they can to salvage, like to use the base for some sort of profit because they haven't gotten any of those tourist residuals that they were expecting to get. All the tourists go straight from there, from the Gangjeong base to Seogwipo City, right? So that's what I understand why she is saying that maybe getting rid of those things and allowing for more developments, more hotels, more things like that may help for the people. Yeah, because like it's sensitive. I have a hard time not siding with the Gangjeong natives because some of them are actually related to my wife and it's they've been there forever. And when they tell me about the protesters, they call them foreigners, Waegukins, just like they would call us.
Yes.
Right. Like these Waegukins, and they always wonder, like, what do they do for a living? Where do they get their money from?
I just want to be clear. There were some foreigners there, but what you're referring to, just to be very clear, is that it was mainlanders coming down. So
And also to be clear, it doesn't mean that all the protesters are not from Gangjeong or not from Jeju either. Right. It's just a lot of them are.
Yeah. So there was plenty of my friends went down and did protesting, but I get what you're saying.
And the other thing is,
she really did. She was in deep water though. She really was. She came real quick back with that apology.
Yeah. It's just, so I don't know. Well, what do you do with Ganjgeong? What do you do about this? Right. Like, are they going to be there forever? Are they just going to keep protesting? Because a lot of them tell me what they want to happen is the Gangjeong base to close.
And that's just not going to happen. I mean, it is so fully built now. And it's like, it's much like what's happening, and not to get off subject and off topic, but it's much like with the airport. Eventually the airport's going to get built. So, what purpose, and this is for everyone to decide themselves, your own personal beliefs, what purpose is there to protest something that is not going to go away, that is there and is actually active and activated, like the military base? I mean, it's there. They run tests, they run schools out of there. Not that the place is not going away.
That makes me actually quite upset because people do not want the airport, right?
Well, that's a whole nother thing, and people really don't want the airport. But then even that, we're not going to start building this airport and it get built and it's just going to go away. But if we brought it back to the topic of the town, the village, that's where it becomes, it becomes touchy because this military base is not going anywhere. So at what point, and it's your personal belief, are you admitting defeat, or are you like, I can't speak for these protesters, so if you were to go away, is that how would they maybe it's not something they're capable of doing in their head,
it's complicated because they were right, like the government was so underhanded with how it brought that naval base to being so disgusting and gross. And they just apologized. They just gave, I'm sorry. Well, I'm sorry.
This is, but not to, I'm like trying to be real sensitive here, but this is a standard thing in Korea that you don't learn your first year, your second year, your third year, but eventually if you stay here a long time, you recognize you don't ask permission. That's just what you do. It's just a thing in Korea. You don't ask permission to do something. You do it and then you apologize later. I mean, look at the Dream Towers. Look at when that happened and they started digging the hole and they tore down all the houses and then dropped that massive hole in the ground. And then they lied about the casino and all the shady things that were, I was almost going to curse there, the shady shiznit. And then, they were just like, sorry about that. Sorry about that. And then they, the hole was sitting there empty for years.
It makes me so upset. It makes
and the whole neighborhood was like, what's going on? And they were just like, oh, my bad. Sorry. And then eventually people forget and look what we have, the Dream Towers. Not that I'm not putting that on the Dream Towers. I'm putting that on the shadiness that went down before, so yeah.
Yeah. So to put all my cards on the table, right? Like I was quite upset with when, not upset, but the protesters to me are not always accurate. They're purposely not accurate, right? Like,
what do you mean?
Well, like when they had the naval view, the naval base open, and they had the naval review of all the different countries they came to.
Right.
They were complaining. One guy I was speaking to was really upset about Japan. Japan was coming here with their ship from Fukushima.
And that wasn't,
Japan wasn't there. Right.
Yeah.
And they compared to Sassam, which used to bother me until you realize how underhanded they are.
Yes.
With how
and then you can see why. Yeah. I think, but that's to put that in perspective, that's not going to be any different than any protest around the world where misinformation just spreads. And, when you have this unity with people and, nothing gets a person fired up more than hearing, oh gosh, why does my brain shut off sometimes when we're recording podcasts?
Because it's late.
Oh gosh, it is late, but my nothing gets people riled out, like one thing to fight against. So one, I mean, that's just a common thing with protests, but I agree with you. There was a lot of misinformation. Sure.
And the Gangjeong protesters are quite anti-imperialist, anti-American, right?
Typically, yes.
Like they were very much against the base, calling it an American naval base.
Oh, of course. And as an American, I mean, I get it, but yeah. So yeah.
Which is not true, right? But
right. It was not true, but yeah.
And just like they're calling the Air Force, the new airport, they're calling it a Air Force base.
Where'd you hear that? Really?
Oh, I follow them, and they have their Facebook groups and things like that.
So they're saying that's what no Air Force base, no.
Yeah, that's part of it, because they at the time
they think it's going to be used by the military.
Well, there were plans to put Coast Guards there, right? So they could help with whatever, but the protesters actually caused them to say, okay, no, we won't do that.
We're just going to put the base.
But at the airport, right? The Coast Guard at the airport. And they're like,
wow, I really wasn't following you. Okay.
And so the government said, no, we won't put the Coast Guard, like the helicopters and things like that, at that airport. But the problem is, once you have an airport, it's very easy to eventually go, you know what? We can land some military planes here. Once it's there, it's not that difficult. Like, what is a piece of asphalt compared to another piece of asphalt?
Well, are we comparing the Coast Guard though to something negative? Because it's an island. I would imagine that the more Coast Guard I mean, didn't we just have a boat out there sinking like 3 weeks ago and a couple of people died.
Yeah.
So my thought process would be a Coast Guard. I'm a little confused by this.
Coast Guard is also a like a law enforcement.
Right? Sure. I just think if you're on an island, I don't believe something I don't know if I'd be turning away help from a coast. I don't know. Okay. Well, this is kind of, we've kind of gone all around in a circle here, but yeah. So